Prepare to question everything you know about time and destiny. I stumbled upon my grandfather's journal, a seemingly ordinary book that holds an astonishing truth, chilling New Year's prophecies written decades ago that have all come to pass. You won't believe the events he predicted and how eerily accurate they proved to be. My grandmother Edith passed away on the coldest night of December 3 years ago. She was 94 years old, and according to my mother Eleanor, she had been waiting to die for nearly 2 decades. Not in a morbid way, but in the manner of someone who had unfinished business on the other side. Someone who needed to be reunited with a person who had left this world far too soon. That person was my grandfather, Harold Prescott. I never met him. He died in 1987, 12 years before I was born. Everything I knew about him came from faded photographs and the reluctant whispers of family members who seemed uncomfortable discussing his memory. There were no grand stories of his life, no treasured anecdotes passed down through generations. Just silence. Heavy, deliberate silence. When my grandmother died, I was tasked with clearing out her home in rural Vermont. My mother could not bring herself to do it, and my father had no interest in the affairs of a family he had only married into. So I drove alone through the snow-covered hills, past frozen lakes and skeletal trees, until I reached the old Victorian house that had been in the Prescott family for over a century. The house smelled of lavender and decay. Dust particles floated in the pale winter light that streamed through yellowed curtains. Every room felt like a tomb, preserved in amber, untouched by the passing decades. My grandmother had lived here alone for 36 years after my grandfather's death, and it showed. His presence lingered in every corner, in the pipe still resting on the mantelpiece, in the reading glasses left on the bedside table, in the coat still hanging by the front door as if he had merely stepped out for a moment. It was on my 3rd day of sorting through decades of accumulated possessions that I found the attic. I had not known it existed. There was no visible entrance from the 2nd floor, no pull-down ladder or obvious door. I discovered it by accident when I noticed a draft coming from behind a bookshelf in my grandmother's bedroom. When I moved the heavy oak furniture, I found a small door, no more than 4 feet tall, hidden behind it. Something about that door made my blood run cold. It was padlocked, not with 1 lock but with 3. Heavy iron locks that looked far older than anything else in the house. The wood around them was scratched and gouged as if someone had desperately tried to break through at some point, then given up. I found the keys in a small velvet pouch sewn into the lining of my grandmother's jewelry box. 3 iron keys, cold to the touch even in my warm palm. When I held them, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. Not quite fear, not quite excitement. Something in between. Something primal. The locks opened with surprising ease, as if they had been waiting for this moment. The attic beyond was small and cramped, the ceiling so low I had to crouch to move through it. Cobwebs hung thick as curtains, and the air was stale with the scent of old paper and something else. Something metallic. Something that reminded me of blood. In the center of the space sat a single wooden chest. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among moth-eaten fabric and dried flowers, was a leather-bound journal. The leather was cracked with age, the color faded from what must have once been a rich burgundy to a mottled brown. On the cover, embossed in gold letters that had nearly worn away, were the initials HP. Harold Prescott. I should have felt excitement at finding something that belonged to my grandfather. Instead, I felt dread. An inexplicable, overwhelming sense that I was about to open something that should have remained closed forever. But I opened it anyway. The first thing I noticed was the handwriting. It was meticulous, almost mechanical in its precision, each letter formed with painstaking care. The ink had faded to a sepia tone, but the words remained perfectly legible. The journal began with an entry dated January 1st, 1952. What I read in those first pages made me forget to breathe. My grandfather had written what he called his New Year's visions. Each year, on the first day of January, he would record what he claimed were prophecies. Detailed descriptions of events that had not yet occurred, written with the certainty of someone describing yesterday's news. I laughed at first. Prophecies. How absurd. How utterly ridiculous. My grandfather had clearly been eccentric, perhaps even mentally unstable. This was nothing more than the ramblings of a disturbed mind. But then I read the first prophecy. It was dated January 1st, 1962, and it described an event that would not occur for another 24 years. The words were specific, terrifyingly specific. And as I read them, the temperature in that attic seemed to drop by 20 degrees. I'm not a superstitious person. I do not believe in psychics or fortune tellers or any of the mystical nonsense that fills late-night television. But what I found in that journal challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. Because every single prophecy in that journal came true. I spent the next 6 hours reading through my grandfather's entries, cross-referencing them with my phone, checking dates and events and specific details. With each confirmation, my skepticism crumbled a little more, replaced by something far more unsettling. How could he have known? How could anyone have known? I brought the journal back to my apartment in Boston. I have spent the past 3 years researching, verifying, and trying to understand what my grandfather had recorded in those yellowed pages. What I have discovered has fundamentally altered my understanding of reality. I'm sharing this now because I believe the world needs to see what I have found. These are not vague predictions open to interpretation. These are specific, dated prophecies that describe events in chilling detail, events that occurred exactly as he described, sometimes decades after he wrote them down. This is my grandfather's journal. These are his New Year's prophecies, and what they reveal about time, fate, and the nature of human existence will haunt you long after you finish reading. The first prophecy I want to share with you is one that stopped my heart when I first read it. It is dated January 1st, 1962, and it describes an event that would not occur until January 28th, 1986. 24 years. My grandfather predicted something 2.5 decades before it happened, with details so precise that coincidence becomes an impossibility. Here are his exact words, copied verbatim from the journal. The new year brings visions darker than any before. I see fire blooming against a blue sky, a white pillar becoming an angel of death. 7 souls will be lost, their vessel torn asunder 73 heartbeats after it leaves the earth. A teacher among them, chosen from thousands, will become a symbol of tragedy. The cold will be blamed, the decision to proceed despite warnings. January will end in mourning for a nation that believed it had conquered the heavens. When I first read this entry, I felt ice form in my veins. I knew immediately what he was describing. Every American over a certain age knows. The Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds after launch, killing all 7 crew members. Among them was Krista McAuliffe, a high school teacher from Concord, New Hampshire, who had been selected from over 11,000 applicants to be the first teacher in space. The subsequent investigation revealed that the disaster was caused by the failure of an O-ring seal in the right solid rocket booster, a failure directly attributed to the unusually cold temperatures on the morning of the launch. Engineers had warned against launching in such conditions, but their concerns were overruled. 73 heartbeats, 73 seconds. A teacher chosen from thousands. The cold will be blamed. How could my grandfather have known these details in 1962? Krista McAuliffe was only 11 years old at that time. The space shuttle program would not begin for another 19 years. The specific technical failure that caused the disaster was determined by the precise temperature conditions on a single morning in 1986. I spent weeks trying to find alternative explanations. Perhaps my grandfather had written this entry after the disaster, backdating it to appear prophetic. But the journal's authenticity has been verified by 3 separate forensic document analysts. The paper, the ink, the oxidation patterns all confirm that these entries were written when they were dated. Perhaps he had access to insider information about NASA's early development. But in 1962, NASA was focused on the Mercury and Gemini programs. The concept of a reusable space shuttle had not even been proposed. The idea of sending a civilian teacher into space was pure science fiction. Perhaps it was an extraordinarily lucky guess. But the mathematical probability of correctly predicting not just the event, but the number of victims, the presence of a teacher, the time elapsed before the explosion, the cause of the disaster, and the month it would occur is effectively 0. I returned to the journal with new eyes, no longer a skeptic but a deeply troubled investigator. What else had my grandfather seen? His writing style changed when he recorded these visions. His usual precise, measured handwriting became slightly erratic, the letters varying in size as if written in a state of agitation. In the margins of many entries, he had drawn small symbols that I could not identify. Circles with lines through them. Eyes with too many pupils. Shapes that seemed to shift when I looked at them directly. After the Challenger prophecy, there was a gap of several pages. Then a note written in red ink, different from the black he used elsewhere. They come every New Year's Eve, just before midnight. I do not summon them. I do not want them. But they show me things, terrible things, and I must write them down or they will never leave. Edith cannot know. No one can know. This knowledge is a curse that I will carry alone. Who were they? What was showing my grandfather these visions? I found a letter tucked between the pages, never sent, addressed to my grandmother. It was dated December 30th, 1978. My dearest Edith, I write this knowing you will never read it. If you knew what I carry, what visits me in the final hours of each year, you would think me mad. Perhaps I am. But the visions are always true, and their truth terrifies me more than any accusation of insanity ever could. I have seen our granddaughter's face, though she has not yet been born. I have seen cities that do not yet exist burning under a foreign sun. I have seen the year of my death, and I know exactly how many New Years I have left. 9 more. 9 more years of visions. 9 more years of knowing what no man should know. When I am gone, burn the journal. Burn it and forget. The knowledge it contains will only bring suffering. My grandfather died in 1987, 9 years after this letter was written. My grandmother did not burn the journal. Instead, she locked it away, hidden behind a bookshelf, sealed with 3 iron locks. She kept it for 36 years, never reading it, never destroying it. What compelled her to preserve something her husband had explicitly asked her to destroy? I believe she knew on some level that these prophecies were real. And I believe she knew that someday someone would need to find them. That someone turned out to be me. The second prophecy I want to share reveals something crucial about my grandfather's visions. They were not limited to American tragedies. Whatever showed him these future events had a global perspective, revealing horrors that would unfold across the world with the same terrible precision. This entry is dated January 1st, 1955. In it, my grandfather describes something that would not occur for 36 years. Read carefully because the details in this prophecy are even more specific than the last. This night, the visitors showed me a distant land where ancient hatreds sleep beneath a veneer of unity. I see a wall falling to the cheers of millions, but the euphoria is short-lived. In its wake comes fracture, a nation splitting into bleeding pieces. The place where empires collided will become a charnel house. I count 6 years between the wall's fall and the beginning of the massacre. The longest siege in modern warfare will last 1,425 days. A city of Winter Olympics will become synonymous with death. My grandfather was describing the siege of Sarajevo. The Berlin Wall fell on November 9, 1989. The Yugoslav wars began in 1991, and the siege of Sarajevo commenced on April 5, 1992. It lasted until February 29, 1996. 1,425 days. Exactly as my grandfather had written 37 years earlier. Sarajevo had hosted the Winter Olympics in 1984. It was known worldwide as a city of international cooperation and athletic achievement. By 1992, it had become a symbol of ethnic violence and humanitarian catastrophe. The precision of these predictions began to reveal patterns. My grandfather was not randomly seeing future events. He was being shown specific tragedies, moments of collective human suffering that would scar history. It was as if whatever entity communicated with him had a particular interest in destruction, in death, in the darkest chapters of human existence. I began cataloging every prophecy in the journal, creating a database of dates, events, and accuracy rates. What I found was staggering. There were 43 prophecies spanning from 1948 to 1986. Of those 43, 39 had already occurred. The level of accuracy ranged from general to impossibly specific, but every single prediction that could be verified had proven true. 4 prophecies remained unfulfilled. They were dated in years after my grandfather's death. January 1st, 2001. January 1st, 2012. January 1st, 2020. January 1st, 2031. I felt my heart stop when I read the 2001 prophecy. 2 towers standing like monuments to ambition will fall before the year's end. Fire from the sky delivered by men who believe they serve a higher purpose. Thousands will die in a single morning, and the world that exists before will never exist again. The nation will respond with decades of war in distant lands. The children not yet born will grow up in a world forever altered. My grandfather died in 1987. He could not have known about the September 11th attacks. He could not have known about the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, which were only completed in 1973. He could not have known about the war on terror that would follow, about Afghanistan and Iraq, about the fundamental reshaping of American society and foreign policy. But he did know. He knew it all. I became obsessed with understanding the mechanism of his foresight. I researched his background extensively, interviewing distant relatives, accessing military records, tracing his life from birth to death. Harold Prescott was born in 1924 in a small town in western Massachusetts. He served in World War II, stationed in the Pacific Theater. His service records indicate he spent 3 months in a field hospital in 1945, suffering from what was then called combat fatigue. The specific nature of his trauma was never documented. After the war, he returned home and married my grandmother. He worked as a clockmaker, a profession that seemed fitting for a man obsessed with time. His shop was known for its precision, for clocks that kept perfect time for decades without adjustment. Customers came from across New England to have their timepieces repaired by Harold Prescott. But there were stories, whispers among the older residents of his town that I managed to uncover. People said Harold Prescott knew things. Small things at first. He would tell customers that their grandmother's clock would stop working on a specific date, and it would. He would refuse to sell a clock to someone, later revealed to have died before they could pick it up. He would sometimes stare at nothing for hours, his eyes unfocused, his lips moving silently. The townspeople eventually stopped asking questions. In small New England communities, eccentricity is tolerated as long as it remains quiet. Harold kept his larger prophecies private, recording them only in his journal, sharing them with no one. But why did the visions only come on New Year's Eve? I found a partial answer in an entry from 1965. The threshold between years is thinner than any boundary in the natural world. In those final moments before midnight, time itself becomes uncertain, and the future bleeds through. They wait for that moment, these watchers beyond the veil. They harvest visions of suffering and feed them to me like bitter fruit. I am their vessel, their unwilling prophet. And every year, the visions grow clearer, more detailed, more terrible. Whatever my grandfather encountered was not benevolent. It took pleasure in showing him tragedy, in burdening him with knowledge he never asked for and could never share. The psychological toll must have been immense. I found prescription records indicating he was treated for chronic insomnia and what doctors of that era called nervous conditions. He refused all sedatives, insisting he needed to remain alert. The journal explains why. If he was unconscious when the visions came, he could not record them. And if he did not record them, they would repeat in his dreams, growing more vivid and more painful until he complied. He was a prisoner of prophecy, trapped by entities he never named and never fully understood. The third prophecy I need to share with you is the one that made me certain this was no coincidence. It is also the one that made me afraid to continue my research. It is dated January 1st, 1970, and it describes events that would begin exactly 50 years later. As I read it for the first time, sitting alone in my Boston apartment, I felt the world tilt beneath me. A plague will emerge from the east, spreading silently before any nation recognizes the threat. It will begin in winter and consume the world by spring. The healthy will become vectors carrying death in their breath. Governments will close their borders, but too late. Cities will fall silent, streets empty, the machinery of civilization grinding to a halt. Millions will die, but more will die from the despair that follows than from the sickness itself. The masks will become symbols, the distance between people expanding into a chasm that will never fully close. COVID-19 was first identified in December 2019 in Wuhan, China. By March 2020, it had been declared a global pandemic. The world implemented lockdowns, mask mandates, and social distancing measures. As of today, over 6 million people have officially died from the virus, though excess mortality estimates suggest the true toll is far higher. My grandfather described asymptomatic transmission, a concept that baffled scientists in the early months of the pandemic. He described the psychological toll, the isolation, the despair that would claim lives beyond the virus itself. Suicide rates, mental health crises, the fraying of social bonds that we are still struggling to repair. He saw it all half a century before it happened. I had to stop reading for several days after this prophecy. I could not eat. I could not sleep. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile my understanding of reality with the undeniable evidence in my grandfather's journal. How does one process the knowledge that the future is already written? That somewhere, somehow, the events of tomorrow already exist, waiting to unfold like a script being performed? It contradicts everything we believe about free will, about choice, about the nature of time itself. I began researching theories that might explain my grandfather's abilities. Precognition has been studied by fringe scientists for over a century, with experiments in remote viewing and future prediction conducted by various government agencies during the Cold War. The results were inconclusive but not entirely dismissive. Some theoretical physicists have proposed that time may not be linear, that the future and past exist simultaneously in a higher dimensional space. If this is true, then perhaps certain individuals, under specific conditions, can access information from these adjacent time frames. But this does not explain the entities my grandfather described. The watchers beyond the veil, who came to him every New Year's Eve. The visitors who harvested visions of suffering and forced him to record them. What were these beings? Were they human spirits somehow transcending time? Were they something else entirely, something beyond our comprehension? I found an entry that offered a terrifying glimpse. Tonight I tried to refuse them. I locked myself in the bathroom, covered my ears, sang hymns at the top of my voice. But they came anyway. They do not use doors. They do not need my consent. They simply are, and I cannot deny them. When I opened my eyes, I saw their true forms for the first time. I cannot describe what I witnessed, for there are no words in any human language that can capture their nature. I can only say that they are old. Older than mankind, older than this world, perhaps older than time itself. They watch us the way we watch ants. They find our suffering interesting. My grandfather was in contact with entities that viewed human tragedy as entertainment. This realization changed everything. These were not benevolent guides showing him the future to help humanity. They were cosmic voyeurs, feeding on the foreknowledge of human misery and using my grandfather as their unwilling chronicler. But why him? Why was Harold Prescott, a clockmaker from Massachusetts, chosen for this terrible burden? I found a possible answer in his military records. During his hospitalization in 1945, he was stationed near Nagasaki. The records indicate he was present in the area on August 9, 1945, the day the second atomic bomb was dropped. There is a note in his medical file, classified and buried until I filed a Freedom of Information request. Patient exhibits unusual neurological activity following exposure to blast radiation. Brain scans show activity in regions typically dormant. Patient reports visions and voices. Recommend continued observation. The atomic bomb may have done something to my grandfather's brain. It may have opened a door that should have remained closed, creating a permanent connection between him and whatever exists beyond our perception of reality. The watchers found their vessel in the ashes of Nagasaki. There is one prophecy remaining that I have not yet discussed. The one dated January 1, 2031. The one that has not yet come true. I hesitate to share it because, unlike the others, this one is not about a distant tragedy. This one is personal. The final prophecy in my grandfather's journal is dated January 1, 1986. It is the last entry he ever wrote, completed less than a year before his death. The handwriting is different from all the others, shaky and uneven, as if written by a man whose hands could no longer obey his will. But the words are clear, terribly, inescapably clear. This will be my last vision. The Watchers have shown me my own ending, and I accept it with what remains of my peace. But they gave me one final prophecy, one that extends beyond my death, beyond Edith's death, beyond anyone now living. The one who finds this journal will be of my blood. He will be born in the year of the dragon, in a month of falling leaves. He will have my eyes, my curse, my connection to the Watchers. And on the New Year's Eve of 2031, he will take my place. The Watchers will come for him, and he will become what I have been. There is no escape. There is no refusal. The vessel must be filled. I was born in October 2000, the year of the dragon in the Chinese zodiac. I have my grandfather's eyes. When I finished reading this prophecy, I sat in silence for hours. The journal lay open on my desk, its final words burning into my consciousness. I had spent 3 years researching my grandfather's predictions, verifying his accuracy, documenting his connection to entities beyond human understanding. And all along, I was researching my own fate. The year 2031 is approaching. In just a few years, I will face the same New Year's Eve that defined my grandfather's existence. The Watchers will come for me, and according to the prophecy, I will have no choice but to accept the burden they carry. I have tried to rationalize this. Perhaps this is the one prophecy that will prove false. Perhaps the pattern of accuracy has exceptions. Perhaps my grandfather was wrong about me, about the future, about the continuation of his curse. But in my heart, I know the truth. I have always known it. Since childhood, I have experienced moments of inexplicable knowledge. Times when I knew who was calling before the phone rang. Times when I dreamed of events that later came true. I dismissed these experiences as coincidence, as the brain's tendency to find patterns where none exist. But now I understand. The connection was always there, dormant, waiting. The Watchers have been patient. They have watched me my entire life, waiting for the moment when I would discover the journal, when I would understand my purpose, when I would be ready to receive their visions. And now that moment is approaching. I have considered destroying the journal, burning it as my grandfather asked my grandmother to do decades ago. But I know it would not change anything. The prophecies are not contained in the paper and ink. They exist somewhere beyond, in whatever realm the Watchers inhabit. Destroying the physical record would not erase the truth it contains. I have also considered going public with this information, sharing every prophecy, warning the world about what my grandfather foresaw. But who would believe me? Even with documentation, even with forensic verification, the idea that a clockmaker from Massachusetts could see the future would be dismissed as fantasy, as fraud, as the delusion of a grieving grandson. So instead, I am sharing this story with you. Not because I expect you to believe me, but because I need someone to know. If the prophecy is correct, if I become what my grandfather was, then my story will eventually become public. The visions I record will come true just as his did, and future generations will look back at this moment as the beginning. But there is another reason I am sharing this now. In the final pages of my grandfather's journal, hidden within the binding, I found a folded piece of paper that I missed during my initial examination. It contained a single sentence, written in handwriting I recognized as my grandmother's. The Watchers can be refused, but only by one who knows their true name. I do not know what this means. I do not know my grandmother's source for this information. The journal contains no reference to any name associated with the Watchers, no hint of how one might identify them beyond their terrifying presence. But it gives me hope. Hope that the prophecy can be broken. Hope that I am not doomed to spend my life recording future tragedies for the entertainment of cosmic voyeurs. I am continuing my research. I am reaching out to scholars of the occult, to researchers of precognition, to anyone who might have information about entities that harvest human suffering. Somewhere in the vast repository of human knowledge, there must be a reference to these Watchers, a clue to their identity, a weapon that can be used against them. And if I fail, if 2031 comes and the prophecy proves true, then I will do what my grandfather did. I will record every vision, every tragedy, every terrible future that the Watchers show me. And perhaps someday someone else will find my journal just as I found his. Perhaps they will continue the search for answers. Perhaps they will find the name that my grandmother mentioned. The story does not end here. It cannot end here. Because somewhere in the darkness between years, the Watchers are waiting. They have been waiting since before humanity existed, and they will continue waiting long after we are gone. They are patient, eternal, unknowable, but they are not invincible. I believe this because I must, because the alternative is despair, and despair is what they feed on. My grandfather carried his burden for nearly 40 years alone in silence, with no hope of escape. I will not repeat his mistake. I will fight. I will search. I will find the truth. And if you have any information that might help, if your family has similar stories, if you have encountered references to entities that show humans the future, please share them. We may be strangers, but we are united by the same mystery, the same fear, the same desperate hope for answers. My grandfather's journal sits on my desk as I write this. Its leather cover is warm to the touch, as if something inside it still lives. Sometimes, late at night, I hear sounds coming from its pages. Whispers in a language I cannot understand. Laughter that has no human quality. The Watchers know I'm searching for them. They know I intend to resist. And I believe, though I cannot prove it, that they are amused. They think I cannot succeed. They think I am just another vessel, another plaything, another source of entertainment in their eternal observation of human suffering. They're wrong. The final chapter of this story has not been written, and when it is, I intend to be the author. Until then, remember what you have read here. Remember my grandfather's prophecies and their terrible accuracy. Remember that somewhere beyond the veil of reality, something is watching us, recording our tragedies, feeding on our pain. And remember that even in the darkest prophecy, there is a space for resistance. The year 2031 approaches. The Watchers are waiting, and I am preparing. This is not the end. If you or your family have experienced anything similar to what I have described, please share your story. Together, we may find the answers that have eluded my grandfather and countless others throughout history. The truth is out there, hidden in dusty journals and forgotten attics, waiting to be discovered. The Watchers have operated in secrecy for millennia. It is time to bring them into the light.